Ms. Baker gave me a few seconds. No one is opposed to exhibit for ID V becoming the next numbered exhibit. So may it be the next numbered exhibit, please?
Yes, it'll be exhibit 601.
Ms. Gertner reserves her right to ask written questions of Mr. Ryall on that document, and so she'll advise us further. Finally, the witness, Mr. Ryall, did refer to a second Gillison, and I mispronounced the name, I regret, report. It's of March of '06. We'll look into that further and speak with all counsel on it when I get more information on it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Commissioner, we've resolved to deal with our time problem this way. I've talked to my friends about the suggested time that they can take, and they've pretty much agreed that they'll take the time that's been talked about, and if they can't finish, they'll finish in writing, or else they'll finish on the time that we've agreed on. And I do note that I had asked, and Ms. Gertner will be doing her questions as noted in writing. She was hoping she might be able to get 5 minutes to ask a couple of oral questions, and I can advise the room, now I've totaled everything up, we are at 1 hour and 55 minutes without any time for Ms. Gertner to ask a question. So if everybody can just be conscious of that and maybe shave a minute or two off, we will free up enough time that we can get 5 minutes of perhaps for Ms. Gertner and maybe even get an afternoon break.
I'm next one. In your hands, sir.
Well, after that, my name's Boris Tazik. I'm here for the province. Mr. Ryall, I'm counsel for the province, and my questions today are directed specifically on MSc certification. The reason for that is we aren't sure if you're going to be coming back before this commission. We understand from Mr. Grote and his testimony in January of this year that you are the DFO lead on MSc certification. Is that the case?
For salmon, that's the case.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
So, in regard to that, Mr. Lyon, would you pull up Exhibit 159, please? We advised your counsel yesterday of this. Are you familiar with this document?
Yes, I am familiar. I helped draft this document.
You helped draft the document. And as the first paragraph says, this action plan provides a detailed response outlining our commitment, that is DFO's commitment, to meeting the 36 Marine Stewardship Certification MSc conditions within a 5-year period. Is that the case?
That is the case.
If we could go down to the bottom of the first page.
I would add there's one other caveat to that maybe would have been better placed in that paragraph. But, you know.
Wait, is that the one at the top of page 2?
Yes, it is.
Well, that's the one I'm going to get to next.
Oh, there you go.
All right. We're on the same wavelength. The bottom of page 1 indicates that the action plan contains significant commitments for Fisheries and Oceans Canada to implement over the next 5 years. All of these actions are consistent with plans already underway within the department. However, is this the sentence you're going to refer to? It's important to note that the implementation of the following action plan assumes there will be no requirement for additional departmental resources. However, as we initiate implementation of the action plan, we may discover that this assumption was flawed and a reevaluation of the original assumption is required.
Yes, that was what I was going to refer to.
All right. And where is DFO in that process? Has there been a reevaluation at this point?
Well, let me, this deals with sockeye, and there's action plans being developed for pink and chum salmon. The pink one is pretty much complete, I would say 90%. The next step in the completing that will be within the month of April this year, I would think. And the chum one, not too much further down the road. And so each one of these plans have a lot of similarities, both in the conditions and how we respond to them. And also there's a lot of the same personnel within the department that are going to be tasked with delivering on these tasks within the 5-year commitments. And so one of our thoughts as we were drafting these up, we knew that these were coming up, and so that was why we put in that however statement. But also on top of that, it's a little uncertain. There's a lot of commitments in here, and we have to reevaluate and see where we're at. The other piece I would add is that there is an annual audit that is undertaken, and Sockeye was certified by the MSC, I think it was July of 2010. And the first audit is going to be undertaken in the week of May the 9th, and we're scheduling that for over 3 days, May 10th, 11th, and 12th, to cover off Sockeye. And at that point, we'll have a evaluation of the progress on meeting the commitments that are outlined in this action plan.
So this is an audit that will be done in conjunction with the MSC certifiers?
That's correct.
Thank you. Well, that most of the questions that I have will actually relate to the status of where things are, and it may be preempted by your saying there's this audit in May, but nonetheless, there's certain conditions that I would like to go over with you. On pages 2 and 3, there's a table that outlines what the various deliverables are, and then the paper goes on to outline various conditions and put them under certain headings. From pages 4 through about 12 matters deal with the wild salmon policy, and one of the other council will be asking you questions on the status of those. If you could turn to page 13 of the action plan. What I'm going to do is go through these conditions. You'll see in some cases there's a deliverable. I'm going to ask you, has that happened? Is there a copy of the report? What the status is, and whether you've had any feedback. So if we could go to the first one on page 13 under Fraser River Sockeye, condition 1. Certification is conditional until a review of the run timing and harvest rates for Saginaw sockeye have been completed and fisheries management plan is consistent with the goal of minimizing the harvest rate on Saginaw sockeye. And in the third paragraph there, it says a report summarizing this information will be made available to the appropriate MSC certifying body for their review by September 2010. Has that report been filed with the MSC?
No, it has not. And as we go through these, we can go through them individually, but I could provide a summary and then see where you want to go with your questions.
Sure, that would be fine.
I'm in the process of putting together a status report, and that won't be completed, I would say, until mid-April, of each one of all the conditions here that are in this document. So my answers might not be fully complete, but that's what we're in the process of doing, is where are we on each one of these conditions. The other piece I would add, when this action plan was developed, it took longer than anticipated to actually achieve certification, and in hindsight, we probably should have moved these timeframes back from where it's identified here of September 2010, meaning that certification did not occur until July 2010, and we drafted the action plan. It was completed in December 2009. And probably we should have put a correction out and moved those timeframes back. We did not. But in answer to your question on the report, we have at this point not provided any reports to the MSC. And one of the reasons for moving up the audit is an annual audit is going to occur. We agreed to have this take place in May because we wanted and agreed with the MSC to get underway with what the status of each one of these conditions are. My anticipation of that audit will be that we'll find out that some are advanced and some are behind.
In that regard, you may have answered most of the questions in a general sense. I was wondering whether it would be possible to get a copy of the report that you indicate you'll have done in mid-April, which will give us an indication of where DFO is with respect to all of these conditions.
I'm just pausing to think about the process too. I mean, we're drafting that. I don't see a challenge in doing that. I'm thinking that we were drafting this in preparation for the May 10th audit. So I'm not seeing a problem with that. It's a status report, but yeah, I'd like to reserve.
I'll just, I don't know anything about that, but I'll put a caution on it that we'll have to check whether giving out the report before MSC sees it is a problem or not, and I'll advise council what our position is. I think that's what Mr. Ryall might be alluding to right now.
That's correct. That's all.
At this point, well, if that, I think we could go with that. My next question would be, there's notwithstanding the status report, or would that status report also indicate the work that has been done, or you're proposing to do over the course of the next while in order to fulfill some of these conditions?
My intention would be to have both, meaning that here's what the status is of the deliverables, and also what we intend to do into the future is what my intent is, and with that. So when we go and have the meeting with the MSC in the week of May the 9th, that we be prepared to address, okay, if we're behind on this condition, what are we doing to meet it? You know, so the overall approach on MSD certification is one has 5 years to remove these conditions. And we agreed to this timeline. We actually didn't need to put this timeline in. This was our commitment because I didn't want us to have these all delivered at the end of 5 years. Wanted to have a work plan that was deliverable, and also considering, as I mentioned, what we'd be doing with pink and chum salmon as well. And so we need to stagger that workload out over those 5 years so that we can deliver on this. So, you know, it's a forecast into the future over 5 years, and things do change. As I mentioned, I know that some are ahead of schedule, and I think some are behind schedule. Okay. And so, you know, overall, to me, it's a guide. And our commitment is to meet these within those 5 years.
Okay. And following up on the audit meeting, would it be possible to get a report on the audit meeting after it's done? Would you get something formal coming from the MSC certifying body at that time?
Yes, they would give us a report. Now, I'm not actually I haven't looked into the next step of this process. I would think that report is posted on their website as a public document, but I'd have to check on that. I mean, yes, they would give us a report. Their whole process has been a pretty open and public process, meaning that any documents that we give them, they post on their website, and same with the reports that they generate.
So that that's something that we could expect, but in any event, if there's some concern there, then I think what we would be requesting is a copy of their report. I've checked the website, and they seem to be pretty transparent in what they're doing, but if we could have that commitment, again, subject to what your council may say, so that we will then have the sort of the up-to-date view of what MSC
what the view overall
is.
That's fine. We'll keep on top of that and liaise with council on any confidentiality issues that arise. I simply don't know what the terms of contract are between MSC and anyone else.
I should mention that the federal government's not the client here as well. We are supporting the application, but we're not the so-called client. That's actually the commercial industry through the Seafood Alliance.
I just wanted, just for my understanding, what you mean by a status report. I mean that in the sense that I've seen status reports that have all different kinds of frameworks, so if you could just tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I was thinking it's going to be a pretty simple status report. Here are the conditions. Here's who's been responsible, accountable, and what the status is on that delivery, and if it's complete, if the MSC accepted that and removed that condition. So to me, it would be that kind of table. That would be what I meant by a status report.
Do I understand then that if something is not complete, that you'd be indicating what the next steps are going to be?
Yes, I think that to me would make sense. If we've not completed it, what has changed, or if we've not been able to complete it because of some resource issue. I mean, things that, for example, we weren't really anticipating an inquiry of this nature, and some of the people that would have been working on some of these items in this table have been doing work on this, for example. I being one of them, I was working on this for the department for 7 months full-time, and if I hadn't been doing that, I might have been doing this. So those sort of things come up, and that's what you can't really anticipate.
Given the state of play, those are my questions, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mr. Leadham is next.
Coming over here so I can see you, Mr. Ryall. I have a tendency to not see beyond our registrar here. For the record, Leadham Initial T appearing as counsel for the Conservation Coalition, otherwise known as the Marine Conservation Caucus, which you're probably a lot more familiar with that terminology. I was the other counsel that was going to ask you questions about the MSC certification process, so this is actually going very smoothly, Mr. Commissioner. But I just wanted to make sure that in that status report that Mr. Tyzek for the province discussed with you, that there would also be an opportunity to look at the deliverables on the wild salmon policy and the deliverables with respect to First Nations, because I noticed in Exhibit 159 that there were also deliverables around those two issues, or those two major issues as well.
Deliverables around First Nations and
the wild salmon policy,
Yes.
the implementation of the wild salmon policy.
right, yes.
And just so that I have it clear, if, for example, if we can have 159, Mr. Lunn, if I can ask you to turn to page, for example, page 11, which under the heading observes legal and customary First Nation rights, and then there's a condition 29 that applies specifically to Fraser, and then onto the page 12 at the bottom of the page, after a lengthy discussion about Canada's duty to consult with Aboriginal groups, the very last paragraph says, in order to meet this condition, DFO will provide a report summarizing how the management system addresses issues regarding Aboriginal and treaty rights related to the sockeye salmon fisheries. This report will be provided by December 2010. So that status report that you've been discussing with Mr. Tyzek would also have that component in it as well.
Yes, it would.
Okay.
What page is that, Mr. Lee? I'm
Sorry, Mr. Commissioner.
What page is on the screen?
What I just read to him is at page 12, at the bottom of page 12, Mr. Commissioner, of 159, following a very lengthy, well, a somewhat lengthy discussion about observes legal and customary First Nation rights.
Thank you very much.
And the preceding aspects that I did not refer to also have a number of tables with which what I call deliverables. And maybe I'll just take you to one of those, Mr. Commissioner, so you can see what I'm talking about. If we can have Mr. Lunn, page 5, the bottom of page 5, and just highlight the paragraph above the table as well as the table. So we will see in your status report that will be filed sometime in April, May of this year, how these issues of identification of conservation units, standardized assessment criteria, define limit reference points for each target stock of CU, how that is coming into play or how it's going to come into being. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. For example, identifying conservation units, you'll see that that paper was published in 2008 and it's
Yes.
available.
Yes, we heard a lot about that.
Right. And there's also another paper that was done and scientifically reviewed this past year as well that's not noted on this table, that was also looking at developing benchmarks for Fraser River sockeye.
Right, that's the
It's
Sue
probably-
Grant paper.
Pardon me?
That's the Sue Grant paper?
That's correct.
Right.
So that paper is not noted on here, and actually I think the commitment to that deliverable was something like 2013. So that's why I was meaning earlier that some of these things are ahead of target and others are behind. So yes, I mean, this would be updated as well.
And the reason, and this is more for the edification of everyone rather than your specific edification or question, is that I had asked questions of some of the other people that preceded you from DFO to the panel, most notably the RDGs, and I wanted to get some time frames for when various components of the wild salmon policy were going to be implemented. And I wasn't able to get a satisfactory response. So that's why I think that I'm honing in on your response to MSC, because it does provide a convenient timetable linkage to the wild salmon policy and when we can expect things to start rolling out. Do I have that right, or am I completely off base there?
I don't think you're off base. I think that when we put these action plans together with these timelines, it was, as also for us to think of, and us, I mean in the department, to think about work plans and how people's times would be tasked. So it serves a couple of purposes. And as mentioned, and not mentioned, but right in the front page, that talked about how these deliverables are consistent with the direction the department is going. I mentioned that Sockeye and Pink and Chum are not that far behind, and so you have these. I would say over 5 years, a series, and I would expect that you'll see. We will see, and we've already seen in the draft Pink MSA report that there are conditions attached, and they number about 40 as well.
Right.
And I think that the Chum one will be in the same ballpark, and they'll look very similar. It's not a small body of work that we're committing to, and one can't forecast, I would say, accurately how everything will unfold, but, this is the best of our ability, and this is what we put forward.
No, I appreciate that. The universe will unfold as it should.
I hope so,
in terms of an evolutionary perspective. But the DFO universe hopefully will walk in tandem with how events will unfold.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to comment on that either.
Well, I'm almost tempted to sit down after that admission, Mr. Commissioner. but I will press on. I want to change topics with you, if I may, and I'm going to cover this very cursorily with you because of time limitations. In your evidence that you gave to your counsel, Mr. Taylor, you mentioned about Mr. Wilson, who's one of my clients, or represents one of my clients, being critical of the Frizzy model. And I just want to pull up, just very quickly, Exhibit 413, if I could, Mr. Lunn. This was a criticism that Mr. Wilson made of the Fraser River Integrated Sockeye Spawning Initiative. Are you familiar with this paper?
Yes. I forget what year this was, but it was a couple of years ago that Ken, there's a date up here, 2009. My recollection is that Ken presented this up in Prince George.
That's correct.
And I was in attendance at that meeting, and I had a presentation as well. And we spent probably at least a good part of the day talking about escapement targets and how one derives those and how one could do this, and Ken made this presentation.
Right. I think at the time Mr. Wilson was wearing a different hat. He wasn't wearing his MCC hat because by then I think the Marine Conservation Caucus had withdrawn from the Frizzy process and Frizzy workshop process, and I think he was wearing the hat of the Upper Fraser First Nations Coalition at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was there ever a formal response that you are aware of to Exhibit 413 by Department of Fisheries and Oceans?
I don't think in, directly replying to this, no. This was directed as a presentation to the Upper Fraser Fisheries Conservation Alliance. I guess, a formal response probably was the presentation I made the same day to that group.
Right.
But, I respect Ken's views that he's put forward. And my question to Ken at that meeting and other subsequent meetings is, you've made some concerns, brought concerns to light, and one of his main ones around lack of stationarity to, I think that word has been discussed here before about that issue. And one way of trying to solve and look at the implications of that is you could use the Frizzy model to take a look at that, but forecasting the future and looking at what the change in productivities are, I don't think is a challenge. But one could use the model and do that. And the other question I've had in the past, and what's the alternative? If you don't like what's in front of you and they have a viable alternative, then I'm all means very interested in knowing it. And I don't mean just from Ken. As I mentioned, I respect Ken's views on this. He has a long history in providing assessments of biological and science information. But I think the model as well has been most recently reviewed in 2010, and the results of that review is that the model does provide useful information for management.
I want to move on in the interest of brevity as well and talk to you about some general questions around decision making, because I really want to focus in upon decision making and how it's conducted by Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Letters are usually sent from some of the participants to the IHPC. And then and we heard this from Mr. Grout, there's usually meetings that are held between various parts of the Integrated Harvest Planning Committee and Mr. Grout or someone from DFO. And then one of the witnesses on one of the panels described this as the letter writing campaign starts. And so letters are then sent in to inform DFO with respect to the IFMP. And somehow or other, at the end of the day, the IFMP is then given and handed up to the minister. And the concern of my clients is basically they participate in this process, they give what you've described as valuable input and other people have described as valuable input, and yet they can't see how that translates into the final decision or the final draft of the IFMP. And what comfort can you give them, other than saying that you've taken their views into consideration? What comfort can you give them about the whole process, about the decision-making process? With all due respect, Mr. Ryall, it does not appear to me to be very transparent. We don't understand how the actual decision is made at the end of the day. Is that just the nature of the beast that we can't simply wrestle it down?
No, I think there was an evaluation done of the IHPC in 2007, and coming out of that evaluation was the idea of, and maybe it was a bit later that the idea came out, but it was to have a meeting in March of the IHPC. Previously, the cycle had been a meeting in November of the full committee to set the agenda for the coming year. And then there would be a South Coast and a North Coast separate meetings to do a postseason review. And then there would be also probably at that meeting, generally there had been discussion about the upcoming events.
Yes.
And then there was not a meeting of the IHPC until May, early in May. And in the interim, there was meetings with Marine Conservation Caucus, First Nations, commercial as well, but they were separate, they were not integrated. And so one of the recommendations was, well, you know, when the draft IFMP comes out, we would think it would be beneficial to have a meeting in March. And so that's the process that we've had for at least the last 3 years. And so that provides another step in the process of the integrated team committee getting together and having a first look at that draft as well. Could there be other improvements made to the transparency of the decision making? I think that's something that could be considered, and how to improve upon that transmission of that detail.
All right, I thank you for that. I want to move on to talk about the FRP and the FRP Technical Committee. And there was some discussion with Ms. Baker and with your council about this process, and particularly with respect to greater involvement of First Nations interests. And I want to remind you that we're in the back of the room, at least my clients are in the back of the room as well, raising their hands and saying, we'd like to have more involvement in this process as well. So my question to you then would be, if you're going to actually take a look at re-examination of the inclusivity of that process, would you then also want to incorporate more of an ENGO presence?
Within the Fraser River panel process?
Yes.
Right. So, I'm not sure what year that was now, but as you mentioned, there are, as a member with that was termed observer status, but a member of the Canadian Caucus, I think, is a better way to present that. And it was talked about as having one member that at that time was going to be Mr. Wilson. And some of the concerns that were put forward is that Mr. Wilson not be able to attend all meetings, and so some flexibility was also provided where quite often Mr. Young is present as well. So the other part to me is taking a look. Doesn't one need to make some other changes? Maybe so. We are, as I mentioned this morning, limited by the current treaty that limits at 12 members of each party. Does that mean that the Canadian caucus would have to be that size? Maybe not. Maybe there's a way of making some changes to the caucus, which is a model that the U.S. have actually applied within their caucus. meaning that they have a larger U.S. caucus, but they still have 12 members that represent that caucus.
All right, I'll take that answer, and those are my questions. Thank you.
I assume Ms. Baker wishes me to proceed. My name is Don Rosenblum, and Mr. Ryall, I appear representing Area D, Gilnet, Area B, Sainer. I'm trying to pare my questions down so that I'm very brief with you. Firstly, I want to focus for a moment on the matter of the funding of the CSAB, and I appreciate that all of us at this commission have bigger fish to fry than the funding of the CSAB by the federal government. But there are a few points that you made that I'd be remiss if I didn't raise them with you and ask for your response. You'll recall in the exchange today you were speaking about the justification the DFO had for not funding the CSAB. And if my memory of your testimony is correct, you spoke about the fact that my clients were of the commercial nature and therefore presumably could afford to participate in their own right without the assistance of the government. Excuse me one moment. To that end, firstly, let's deal with basics. You would agree with me, sir, that the IHPC did unanimously make a recommendation that there be funding from the federal government, from DFO to the CSAB, correct?
I would agree that was a consensus of the IHPC, yes.
Right. And you'd agree with me further, as I understand it from the record, that DFO does fund the SFAB, in other words, the Sports Fishery Group, the equivalent body at that end.
When you say funding, there are limitations to all these. I mean, the funding is not open-ended, and it's funding for attendance at meetings, yes.
Yes, and for secretarial assistance for the record and things of that sort.
That's correct. The department does cover that.
All right. And thirdly, would you agree with me that in terms of the CFAB that is funded to the extent you just testified to, that this is made up of owners and operators or employees of for-profit recreational lodges or guides, and that by their own economic analysis, these commercial enterprises purport themselves to be highly profitable? You'd agree with that, wouldn't you?
Well, I can't speak to their profitability one way or the other.
No, but I said they purport to be profitable.
Well, the other part I would mention too is that in the terms of reference that they are not in the majority on that SFAB board. So if we go back and look at the terms of reference, those groups are in the minority.
You would agree there are a significant number on that board?
I would agree that there is a number that are on that board, yes.
And appreciating that fact, and appreciating that for the past 12 years, other than last year, 2010, that the commercial fishery obviously was a economic basket case for obvious reasons we all know about, or we wouldn't be here today. How do you rationalize, you as DFO rationalize, denying funding to the beleaguered CSAB, when in fact you are funding the other group?
Well, I wouldn't say that for the folks that are just on the CSAB, are they all just salmon fishermen? And what's the obligation of the federal government to provide attendance and funding at these meetings? Well, as far as the recommendation and consensus that came forward from the IHPC, we did carry that forward. It really is a policy choice, and the answer was that we would not be funding the CSAB. Our view is that we provide funding for certain organizations. Yes, we do, as we've gone through them here today. And we also do provide funding at this point in time to the Integrated Harvest Planning Committee that also includes membership for the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board to attend the integrated process.
Appreciate that, but I don't want to take up any more time other than to invite you to agree there's an inconsistency in funding the SFAB and not funding the CSAB. Do you agree with that?
I would agree that they are not funded, yes.
No, that's not what I said. do you agree there is an inconsistency in funding one group and not the other?
Well, I don't view them as necessarily inconsistent. That's why I didn't specifically say I agreed with you.
Okay, I want to come to the second and last area of my examination of you. I want to discuss harvest management and your area of interest with an overview at, as I always describe it, 30,000 feet up. And I want to invite you to agree with me that for a robust and effective harvest management model, it's predicated in part on 2 points. In part on 2 points. One is that there is within the model an integrated, comprehensive socioeconomic analysis component for analyzing trade-off considerations. And secondly, in part, that it integrates a comprehensive habitat analysis linked to taking remedial habitat restoration steps where necessary. Now, I want to ask the question again now that you appreciate the whole of the question. Do you agree with me that to have an effective and robust harvest management model applied, that in part 2 components are necessary? And let's talk about each of them separately. Firstly, that there is an integrated, comprehensive socioeconomic analysis component so that you can analyze the trade-offs. Do you agree with that principle?
I agree that having those components would be an improvement. And
let's talk about component 1 and then component 2 so that we don't mix up the record.
Sure.
So the socioeconomic side. You agree?
I would agree that there would be an improvement to the analysis. Does it need it all the time? I don't think I would agree with that. But I would agree that there improvements could be made to the social and economic analysis that we've done to date, which is what I did say this morning.
Well, you took my question one step further by saying there could be improvement. I'm simply first asking you, as first principle, do you agree that that component should be clearly integrated, should be effectively integrated into the model?
The witness said no.
I didn't hear the witness say no, but
He
obviously...
said he didn't think it was needed.
I'm sorry, is that what you said? I did miss that. Did you?
I said it would be an improvement if it was included. And I think that, does it necessarily need to be there? Not necessarily.
All right. But you say, sorry, but you say it would be an improvement if it was there. What quite do you mean by that? Are you then saying that there is a shortcoming in the modeling up to this point in time in terms of integrating socioeconomic analysis into the model?
Well, I mean, going back to what I said this morning, I said that we did an analysis in 2006. It had some shortcomings to it, which was identified by Mr. Gisselson in the report back to us. I said that I think that it's a shortcoming and that we can improve upon the analysis by having that included. The only difference I'm making is that you're saying that it has to be there, and I'm saying it's an improvement.
It would be an improvement if it's there.
Yeah.
All right, and we talked about you talked about Mr. Giflisson's recommendations, and there was another document, an exhibit, put forward on the same score. Can you inform this commission what you envisage would be an effective socioeconomic component, economic analysis component to the model? In other words, how do we make this better than it is today? How do we incorporate that component so that it is effectively part of the consideration in making harvest management decisions?
You know, when we started on this process and developing the TAM rules, I think everyone's familiar with that expression, that we developed in Frizzy. I wanted to separate the social and economic from the biological, and the allocation part. First off, if we agree upon what the TAM rules are, the allocation becomes a separate discussion. So who actually harvests the fish is a separate piece. Do you follow?
Yes.
And so the focus when we first started these was to focus on setting up TAM rules around achieving, which is the conservation objectives, the priority that I think everyone agrees upon. And then the discussion then would move on to the social and economic. Now, that's why we undertook in 2006 that study that I talked about that had some issues that was pointed out by the author. How would I see, in an ideal world, the next step to me in the evolution would be to link that analysis within the model itself that takes the output from, if we agree upon the TAM rules, and then move on to the actual how those fish are harvested and the social and economic impacts. That could be another module that could be added to that model.
And that's doable, isn't it?
Is it doable? I think the economic part is doable to some extent. I'm not an economist. I mean, I can already see challenges which have been outlined in various economic reports in the past about how you value recreational fish, how you value the commercial, and all those sorts of things. I see also big challenges on the value for, and when I say value, there's many different ways of valuing for First Nations, for food, social, and ceremonial. I see big challenges there.
You'd agree with me, would you not, sir, that up to this time, little effort has been made by DFO to integrate the socioeconomic analysis into the modeling? Would you agree?
With the exception of what I've talked about here today, that's the work that we've done today.
Yes. And from my perspective, maybe it is only my perspective, at the end of the day it's the commissioner's perspective that will carry the day and no one else's, but from my perspective, listening in month to month at this inquiry, I have not heard of DFO indeed applying socioeconomic analysis to any of the harvest management decisions that we have heard about in contemporary times. Do you believe I'm off base in my perspective?
I do think you are somewhat off base, yes. I do think that, and I say that because of not just the work that I referenced here, I've seen others that have looked at other fisheries, crab fisheries, for example. Recently there was analysis done as well.
Well, I'd like to explore that a little bit, and during my precious half hour of time, I'd like to explore that. I'm not being argumentative with you, but I want to hear out from you where you believe that the department has effectively applied a socioeconomic analysis to their harvest management decisions. We have Mr. Morley having testified earlier in this inquiry, in fact last year, about the lack of economists within DFO's ranks and the lack of them considering socioeconomic analysis. I'm interested in you providing the Commission briefly with examples of where the department did an analysis on the socioeconomic level before making harvest management decisions.
Well, I referenced one this morning around cultus.
Yes, and I recall that. Any others that come to your mind?
That I've been involved in? No.
Well, that you're aware of.
Well, I mentioned just now the crab as well.
Yes, anything else?
I mean, the point you raise is how many are there? Should there be more? I mean, the DFO mandate is already quite broad. Should we be undertaking social and economic analysis across the board as part of our regular business of operation? Is really not a question best directed to me, I don't think.
All right. But from your perspective, you obviously believe that it would be favorable to do more analysis, socioeconomic analysis in the course of applying the models for harvest management.
I think that it would be an asset to undertake that type of analysis to better appreciate the implications.
Yes. And do you believe that DFO currently has the capacity financially to carry out such analysis, or is that one of the shortcomings to the process?
The current capacity to do that, once again, I don't really think that's my area of expertise to answer your question on that.
All right, so I come back to my 30,000-foot question, which, to put it back into context, I was asking you, in the course of applying a robust and effective harvest management model, whether it was predicated on, and I went to two components. One was integrating a comprehensive socioeconomic analysis to the decision making, and the second component was integrating a comprehensive habitat analysis that would be linked to taking remedial restoration steps where necessary. Would you agree that also should be in part incorporated into any harvest management model?
You're going to have to explain. I mean, that's a very broad, open question. What do you mean by an integrated habitat?
No, I didn't mean integrated. I said integrating a comprehensive habitat analysis component. And if you want me to clarify that, I'm very happy to. The issue, sir, is it not, in part, when making harvest management decisions, whether or not habitat is playing a role in the state of the fish abundance, and the question being then if habitat is a factor that is causing a fish under the wild salmon policy to be within the red zone, to take remedial steps to improve that habitat as part of the response to the fact that it has gone into the red zone.
Well, yes, I would agree, I think, with what you just said. I say I think, but, you know, you were saying integrated into the harvest management decisions, and so I was having a hard time seeing how we'd exactly do that. I think, as well as some of my comments this morning, like the mandate of the department is, as I mentioned here this afternoon, is quite broad, and now, you know, the mandate only does go so far as habitat. Other jurisdictions do have a responsibility in this area, and they would have to be as part of this equation as well, and to what I think you're talking about in far as protecting habitat and those choices of whether it's water removal or the use of the land that's near those streams. They all do, those choices all have an impact on fish production. And just to say that by the department taking those into account, we would have the sole ability to do that, I think would be misleading the inquiry.
But would you not agree with me that the current frizzy model does not, when applied, does not trigger off any motivation to deal with habitat restoration? Rather, the frizzy model, when applied, simply leads to a closure of the commercial fishery, can lead to the closure of commercial fishery.
Well, I mean, it was not developed as a habitat tool, right? It was developed as a decision tool to identify control over fisheries, right? And so if I was to look at a habitat model, I would be approaching this in a quite different manner than what the intent of the frizzy model undertook. I'm just saying, are we going to add another module on habitat onto frizzy? I don't think really that's the issue at hand, and I don't think that's what you're asking me either. I think you're asking me is how do you provide protection for habitat, and how do you ensure that there's habitat there for fish production? Implicitly, the model takes production changes into account. If you lose habitat, whether it be water or changes to that habitat, there will be changes into the productivity of the fish, but is that the best way to deal with habitat? And my argument would be is it's not. And I would think that that's why I raised it. There are other jurisdictions that have a responsibility here as well, and just to say that DFO will take those on is not wholly within its mandate.
No, I appreciate that, and it's maybe multi-jurisdictional, and so one has to be creative in how one puts together the plan. But my last questions, because I am running out of time, excuse me. I'm running out of town too, believe me, with this holiday.
I think I might run out of time.
At least wait until you've finished answering my questions, if you don't mind. The question is, can you propose how the modus operandi of the harvest managers within DFO can be motivated when responding to a stock that's imperiled, be motivated to deal with the habitat side of the problem as opposed to simply responding by simple reflex by closing the commercial harvest?
Well, that's a very interesting question to ask. You know, not just on Fraser sockeye and salmon in general. So, you know, one tool is the control over fisheries that the department has, and licenses and conditions of license and opening and closing, right? And that's what these TAM rules were pretty much set up to do, as far as protecting the amount of fish, identifying how many you would like to have for a conservation unit on the spawning grounds. But the question you asked is much broader, and so it's not just changing that TAM rule. That's a whole different issue, and we're talking about modifications and improvements to habitat. I think the other piece of the equation as well, to me, is where does enhancement fit in as a tool as well?
Yes. And you would agree with me that the current modeling does not tie down or force DFO to be motivated to take those remedial steps where necessary?
No, I don't agree with that.
You don't?
No.
No further questions, thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Good afternoon, Mr. Ryall. Philip Isaac for the Area E and the Coalition. And what I wanted to start off with, Mr. Ryall, is the question I've been asking everybody. The buildup of the fishery, the Fraser River sockeye fishery, from the early 1960s to early 1990s, late 80s, pretty remarkable achievement.
That's the question. Is it a remarkable achievement?
Yes.
I think it was a remarkable achievement. Probably many causes to that. Not all just management, but also actual productivity as well that changed over that period of time.
We're going to get into those other factors, and I'm always conscious of my time limit here, so I'm sorry to cut you off there. So then we come along 1992, we see this drop in productivity start. We have the Pierce-McRae report into the missing fish in 1992. Do you remember that?
I do.
1993, we put a fair amount of fish in the river to ensure, so coastal seine fishery, of course, is affected. Do you remember that?
Do I remember?
The impact on the coastal seine fishery in 93, a lot of fish in the river, less fishing outside. That shift, do you remember that?
Not the way you're casting it, no.
No, it's okay. So, and then along came 1994, more missing fish, a problem in the coastal fishery where too many fish on the Adams Run were taken initially. A report that concluded DFO was in a state of denial. Do you remember that?
State of denial about?
The existence of a problem, I think the word, and let alone something to do about it. There's a 1994 report by John Fraser.
Well, there was many things in John Fraser's report and he made recommendations to changes, and many of those were adopted, and you'll find the answers to that in response.
I guess what I'm getting at, you do remember the report and the controversy. And then 1995, do you remember gillnet fishermen from the Fraser River taking over, ripping the doors off the Department of Fisheries and occupying the building for a day so they could get the fishery in the river closed down? Remember that? Were you around then?
I don't remember that exact instance, no.
And then in 1996, the coastal fishery slowed down again because of the impacts in 1992. Remember that?
Well, I'm not sure where you're going, what you're asking me about remembering, and so, like, for me to keep saying yes or no, I don't know what you're asking me, I guess, and so it would be helpful, like, over the years, where you started in 1960 and talked about the increase in the runs, and what I did say is, to me, it's not all just about management, and it's about what actually happened. And if we looked and what happened as far as productivity of fish and how that's changed over time as well.
And sorry to cut you off again, Mr.
But
Ryall.
you want me to answer?
Productivity's fine, but I just want to quickly go through and then ask a couple questions in conclusion. I see Ms. Baker getting up.
And maybe you can let the witness finish his answer, even if it means you have to wait to ask your next question.
Do you have more comments on productivity, Mr. Ryall?
Well, I think it's informative to look at a host of things, and there's been reports done recently that take a look at changes in productivity over time that I think are informative, and those changes have not to do with anything to do with changes by management or the application of that management, and so the reason I hesitate to answer your questions about do I agree or disagree is that I don't have enough information one way or the other to agree or disagree.
So then we come along to 1997, a pretty successful fishery by all measures. And you were involved in fisheries management this time, weren't you? You were a biologist
In what years?
in 97.
Yes.
Then 1998, small commercial harvest on a 10 million run. Too specific for you?
I mean, there's so many details in your question about depending on which year, and I suppose all your questions are referring to Fraser sockeye returns. Some of them are quite large, and some of them are quite small, and the amount of harvest does go up and down, and as it has in going all the way through the whole history of Fraser sockeye.
Okay. Now we go to 1999, and the Fraser River fisheries closed. Do you remember that? The public commercial fishery virtually closed in 1999. First time in 30, 40, 50 years. Do you remember that?
Well, we'd have to look at what the reasons were for that.
No, I'm not asking about the reasons. I'm just asking whether it was closed or not. Do you remember that?
Which fisheries are you referring to?
1999, public commercial salmon fishery on the coast.
Which fisheries are you
Fraser
referring
River
to?
sockeye. All my
All
questions are about
fisheries?
Fraser River sockeye, yes.
I don't think all fisheries were closed in 1999.
2000, you were getting more involved in management then. Again, a fairly decent run size, small commercial fishery that year, about 18% of the total run, the public commercial fishery. Don't remember that?
Which fisheries are you referring to?
I'm referring all through these questions, series of questions, I'm referring to the public commercial fishery on the coast. What we call the Canadian commercial fishery.
You're referring to recreational and commercial?
No.
Is that the
Commercial.
commercial? Okay.
So then we go into 2001, and I think you were quite involved then, and we had quite a large one, and that's at tab, if Mr. Lund could pull up tab 7. So we can see at the bottom of this table, and you're familiar with this document, the Fraser River Panel Report?
Yes, I am.
So if you look at the bottom, we see a run of 7.2 million. And at the top, we can see Canadian, what they label as Canadian commercial catch of 247,000. So a pretty small Canadian commercial harvest on a run that small. Is that correct?
297,000 that was harvested that year, yes.
On a run of 7.2 million, traditionally quite a small harvest, if you were looking at it historically.
Well, I think we need to take a look at the total harvest and see what that amounts to as well overall, and what the reasons are for what happened in 2001.
Again, I'm not asking for reasons, I'm just asking for, is that a big number or a small number? Is that a big harvest or a small harvest compared to pre-1990?
Pre-1990.
Yeah.
What's the relevance of pre-1990? I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons.
I think relevance is up for me to determine. If you could just answer the question, I'd be happy.
Okay, but the reason I'm asking that is that what were the escapement targets, what were the fisheries, what were the conservation objectives, which would all then lead into what the fisheries that transpired in 2001.
I understand your point on that, and there may be very good reasons that the commercial fleet only harvested 297,000. I'm just asking, is that a large number compared to historical harvest, or a small percentage compared to historical harvest?
Overall, I think it's best to look at these things across the board and not just pick off one year and ask me if it's a small number or a large number. And so is 300,000 a large number or not? I would say that it's not a particularly large number of harvests.
So in 2001, the Parliamentary Standing Committee did an investigation into the 2001 fishery. I think you actually appeared before it.
It may have, yes.
Perhaps we can have Exhibit 70 up, Mr. Lund. Here we have a total run of 15.1 million, and we have a Canadian commercial harvest of 1.3 million. Is that a large commercial harvest on a run that size compared to historical times?
Historical being pre-1990?
Pre-1990.
I'm having a hard time answering your questions because one has to look at a whole suite of things here, and not just whether these numbers are large or small. One, to me, needs to look at what's the reason for the harvest amounts are, and not just say, well, is the amount of harvest by First Nation catch, for example, of 13,000, is that a small number or a large number? there needs to be some linkage back to what the objectives are, and not just pull a number out of a table. Say, is that a large one or a small one? I could look at this table here on United States commercial catch, and there's a Alaska net catch of 1,000. Is that a large number or a small number? It looks like a pretty small number to me. So the reason for that would be is that there are not targeted fisheries up there, and that there would be an incidental bycatch, and there was very little migration of fish through that area in that year. So each one of these numbers I could go through and look into the details of it, and what the reason was. We have a total return of 15 million. We have a spawning escapement number of 10 million. There was a reason for having that spawning escapement of 10 million, and there was a lot of disagreement around that, which then resulted in why there was so little harvest. And it had to do with a conservation concern around lake runs, is my memory of this, and an en route mortality that resulted in fisheries stopping, and that there was lots of fish that were put onto the spawning grounds that not everyone agreed with.
So in 2002, there was the Shamoot. Mr. Shamoot did a review, an external review into the management of fishery that year.
Yes.
So Pierce, Fraser, Shamoot, a couple standing committee reports, and then in 2004, at tab 9, Mr. Lund. And I'm just going to ask you to identify that this is a Fraser River panel report.
Yes, it is.
Okay. And in 2004, we had the Williams investigation into the fish that went missing and the very low escapement that got on the spawning grounds. Do you remember that?
There was a review by Mr. Williams of the 2004 season, that is correct.
And another parliamentary standing committee investigation?
There was, and so it looked at a whole range of things, and once again it looked at what the actual conditions were and what the choices that were made at that time for fisheries. One of the concerns in 2004 as well is about environmental conditions, and in recent years those have been a concern for Fraser sockeye as well.
Well, I think we'll get to that in just a second. So along comes 2006, we had a fishery for the public commercial fleet. 2007, the fishery was closed.
Yes.
2008, the fishery was closed.
Yes.
2009, the fishery was closed.
2009, the fishery was closed, yes. It had one of the lowest returns, if maybe not the lowest return in 2009, of about 1.3 million.
I guess this brings me to where I was heading with, and I'm sorry for the long introduction to a couple of questions at the end. Fairly good success. What do you think? I mean, has DFO figured out what they're doing wrong in the past 20 years? I mean, most managers haven't had the chance to answer this question in here so far. I want to put it to you straight. What's happened since 1992 that has led to at least 5 investigations, fisheries closed like they've never been before? What's the main things that have happened in terms of management?
A number of things have changed, and as we've gone through the years here and asked me questions, environmental conditions have changed within the Fraser River. I think from, if you want to pick 92 as the year for whatever reason, as well as we've seen changes not just within the Fraser but also in the marine environment as well. I think those things are real. I think 2009, for example, we had a return of, I think it was about 1.3 million. Probably the lowest return in a long time, if not historical. No fisheries occurred. Why is that? On the flip side of that, 2010, we had a very large return. Lots of fish returning. Why is that again?
So I guess that's why I'm asking you. Has the department figured this out? I mean, the inquiries here, commercial fishermen have come in and said what the reasons are. We've heard some scientists say. You as a senior DFO manager, what are the top 3 reasons for the chaos in the fishery in the last 20 years?
I think that a number of reasons have been put forward, and one of the ones I've already mentioned, I do think, is that there have been climatic changes that have influenced the amount of fish that are produced and also had an impact on those fish that returned. I think that en route mortality has occurred in a number of years as far as fish that swim up the Fraser River. and have caused challenges in the actual estimation of the total returns as well. Not just because those fish had died, it's a challenge to estimate of how many died between counting those fish at mission and how many end up on the spawning grounds. I do think that as well we've seen quite large swings in marine survival, and they've been quite variable. Is that the whole answer? Probably not.
Okay, those are helpful. I have about 6 minutes left, I gather. I'm getting the look from Wendy here. Perhaps we could go to tab 2, Mr. Lunn. And we're going to go to page 15 in that document. And it's the top paragraph on the page. And we've talked a lot about various DFO management issues and structured decision-making and independent reviews. And I always thought this was an interesting example of how a management decision is made that can have a big impact on commercial fishermen. And starting about the third sentence down, we talk about the late run, and then they conclude that the Area E fleet lost a $5 million fishery to put an extra 300 fish in the spawning grounds when total spawning was 105,000 fish already. So we went from 104,700 to 105,000. Now, is in your view, is that good management of the fishery?
Well, I have to read this over before I'd answer that question. So what actually transpired here? Would you like me to take a minute to read it, or?
No, I think we'll move on because we have so much time. I just wanted to put that question. If you were a fishery manager and a fishery over here would deliver $5 million and you're going to put 300 more up the grounds when you had 104,700, would that be a good decision or not? So we'll just move on.
But I don't think that's really the question. The question here is late run fish are experiencing high en route mortality, and you're trying to meet conservation objectives. And so to me, it's not a matter of the way you've cast this question of whether it's a choice of $5 million or to save 300 fish. And so I don't think that's the appropriate question. And so I haven't read this whole thing, but just scanning it, that's what I come up with. My conclusions of looking at the question you posed is not accurate.
So the Parliamentary Standing Committee considered it an unjustifiable decision, and you say you need more time to decide whether they're right or not?
No, I'm not saying that. I just said the way you posed the question to me was not an accurate reflection of what the issue was.
Okay.
You asked if we were going to save 300 fish was worth $5 million. Is that right?
No, I'm saying save 300 fish when your escapement was already 104,700. To save the additional 300 fish, was it worth $5 million?
And once again, I'd say what the question is around what we're trying to achieve on conservation, and in our view at that time it was justifiable.
Okay. Could I go to tab 3?
Now, I haven't read this in
documents,
detail,
Mr.
so
Long?
that's what I'm saying here based upon looking at this here for a couple of minutes.
And I'm going to go quickly to page 32. And this is another Parliamentary Standing Committee report. I hope I'm at tab 3. We're going to page 32. And you can see at the very last sentence on that page, it says the issue of net entanglement and its impact, and it continues on to the next page, was raised by Mr. Bob Gould, who performed independent research in this field for several years. Mr. Gould's research shows that because of a dropout phenomenon, a set net left unattended in the water for 24 hours will land only 1/6 of what would have been landed if the net had been checked every 2 hours. So this issue of a dropout rate in set gill nets in the canyon, did you hear about that before the Standing Committee raised it? Are you familiar with the issue around that?
Well, I'm aware of the issue that you've raised here, yes.
And can you tell me if anything's been done?
As far as,
Well, let's say the harvest in the canyon is 250,000 fish in 1 year, and Mr. Gould is right. We're talking about, maybe 1.25 million fish going missing. So it seems like an important issue. Can you tell me, has there been studies to determine what the dropout rate is? What they can do to affect it?
I'm not aware of whether studies have been done.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Are these documents, Mr. Ryall, that you just referred to, are they now exhibits, or do you wish to mark as
I'm
exhibits?
sorry, Mr. Commissioner. I've been meaning to enter them as exhibits as I've been going along.
We should
And
We could perhaps do that then.
Yeah, I wonder if when that's done, if you could refer to the tab and then the title and then give it an exhibit number, because you often refer to them just as tabs without identifying the document.
Okay, when I refer to a tab, it's not an exhibit yet, I'm sorry.
So tab 2 is where you started?
Just for the record, I think if we could identify the tabs he went to, and you could say tab, whatever the title is, and give the exhibit number, because the record will refer to a tab, so we need to make it clear.
So a tab I want to go to, the next one is tab number 10. I'm sorry. Let's mark the exhibits.
You want to go back?
I can help. If we started at tab 7, which was a PSC report dated 2005.
602. The next one will be...
With tab 8 it was referred to.
That was dated 2001.
Excuse me, 2001 was tab 7. Tab 8 was 2002 PSC report.
Tab 9.
I'm already confused.
Tab
There's
9
more
is-
than one person speaking at once, and I can't figure out what's an exhibit.
Tab 9 is the 2004 report of the Fraser River Panel to the Pacific Salmon Commission.
Tab 9 will be 603.
Tab 2 is the 2001 Fraser River Salmon Fishery report of the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans.
Tab 2 will be 604.
Tab 3 is Here We Go Again, or the 2004 Fraser River Salmon Fishery.
605. And the one you want to go to now is tab 2, right?
I'm sorry, tab 4, I just want to mark for
Tab 4.
identification. It's the 2004 Salmon Fishery Postseason Review.
For identification, you say?
No, as an exhibit.
As an
but
exhibit,
I'm-
okay.
I'm just asking Mr. Ryall to recognize it and identify it.
606.
And tab 10 we haven't looked at yet. If you could pull that up, Mr. And this is the Area E Gillnetters Association Fishery Management Plan, Area E Commercial Salmon Fishery 2002.
That's tab 10. The 607.
Mr. Ryall, are you familiar with that document?
With this document?
The area plan?
I'm familiar with it.
Okay, I'm not going to ask questions on it because we're almost out of time. And I want to add one last document, tab 5. It's the International Pacific Salmon Fisheries Commission Annual Report 1961.
Tab 5 will be marked as exhibit 608.
608. And I'd love to ask more questions, but I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Ryall, for your assistance today. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I don't know if you did want to have a break this afternoon, but we have 15 minutes with Mr. Harvey, 10 minutes with Mr. Lowe's, and then I think there'll be a little bit of time for Ms. Gartner as well, so even if we do take a break.
Let's take a 10 minute.
Hearing no recess for 10 minutes.